If you love giant robots, then I think we can be friends. My name is Clement, and here are the top 20 best mech indie games. So you won't be seeing Armored Core or Mech Warrior here, but let's begin with Project Nimbus Complete Edition, a high-speed mech action game that has cool designs and awesome weapons, also having a narrative that is a little generic but is similar to the Gundam anime, being a solid all-rounder to kick us off. Mech games come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, including side-scrolling action platformer, with the indie pick of course being Panzer Paladin, in which you're controlling a mech that primarily wields a sword and shield, but mixes that with on-foot elements where you just control the pilot. Interestingly, this has a build-your-own weapon system which is largely cosmetic, so it's a weird gimmick, but pixel art titles are my favourite, and it is excellently done here. The boss fights against the demons are impressive as well, with levels themed around various countries, and has that world map level select screen which I adore, and is pretty underrated all things considered. On a budget, how about a completely free title named Steel Salvo, a first-person shooter for all intents and purposes that puts you in the cockpit of a mech, having to protect the moon Triton from hordes of enemy robots. You have two weapons and an energy sword, so that's a couple of options, and does have a great look as well. However, do note that this is very short, about 15 minutes max, and I'm not sure if it is being made into a full game, but still, for free, why not give this a go? Tactics and mech games do go hand in hand, going back to classic titles like Front Mission, with Mainframe Defenders being a twist on that formula in the modern age. You're controlling a squad of prototype robots as they attempt to defend a complex mainframe from viruses, being a little bit more abstract in combat, but is no less fun, since you have plenty of strategic options at your disposal. For example, you can cause enemies to overheat or to melt them with a corrosive attack, having an interesting upgrade and customization system for your units as well. The levels are procedurally generated, so there is replayability, with unlocks even if you fail a run, so there's always something new to try in terms of units, upgrades, items and more, having an excellently done throwback visual style as well. Another tactics title worth a look is Mech Armada, a grid-based roguelite that sees you building custom mechs and taking on all sorts of monsters from an alien swarm. The play area is much more restricted and rectangular in concept as compared to other tactics titles, leading to interesting implications in terms of strategy, especially with regards to your party composition and the mechs that you construct. Speaking of which, the amount of customization and the parts that you can put on said mechs is impressive and is one of the main draws of the game, with a modern visual style that looks great as well. Of course, even mechs are not immune to the vampire survivorsification of everything, with the most successful example here being Project Lazarus. If you're not familiar, bullet heaven roguelites are a subset of the top-down action roguelite, but instead of a bullet hell title where you have to avoid enemy projectiles, you are the source of said projectiles, which comes in handy since you have to fight off an insane number of enemies, with the escalation of your power from upgrades being the main draw, and I suppose is a more mindless entry as compared to the rest of the titles on this list, but if you want something quick, this is the title to get. One of the most unique indie games is Mech Engineer, a strategy title that has you assembling mechs and then setting them loose in semi-auto battles against alien bioweapons. For the most part, this is a menu-driven game since you are assembling your mech piece by piece, down to selecting pistons and injector for your mech power reactor, and then choosing weapons, considering the type of enemies you will face and the rate of ammo consumption, the overall weight and stats of the mech itself, like armor and speed, and even have to manage the pilot that sits in said mechs, with it being a little unintuitive to grasp at the outset, so you need to spend a little bit of time reading the in-game manual or refer to Steam guides, but once you get past that, it's a fascinating title with nothing else quite like this on the market. Back to action games in Astebreed Definitive Edition, a game from, can you believe it, more than 10 years ago, but it still holds up and fits in very naturally with the anime mecha theme in being a shoot 'em up title, but it is not just limited to a side-scrolling horizontal one of these, but also vertical and even where the camera swings to behind the robot. It is very anime as well, which is great in this particular case, with plenty of weapons, awesome visuals, and a high score chase that is reminiscent of arcade titles, and even a bunch of stuff to unlock like the model viewer so that you can take your time to examine the mechs, and it's a no-brainer if you love the genre. One of the more recent entries is Phantom Brigade, a tactics title that is both turn-based and real-time elements, which is the most interesting part. This has a timeline system in which you're able to peek a few seconds into the future, being able to see what enemies are going to do, and then to react accordingly, with the action then resolving simultaneously in real time. The physics in this game is awesome, since you can tackle enemy robots into buildings and then just watch the building explode brick by brick, with impressive customizations of the mechs as well in terms of the number of parts available, and is relatively underrated since it started off live as an early access title on the Epic Games Store and might not have made that same impact when it later released on Steam. Speaking of customization, one of the most impressive titles is M.A.S.S Builder, which has an insane number of options for you to build out your mech, which has an anime theme as well, and has more in common with something like Gundam. It is very character action in terms of combat, as your private military corporation is engaged in a war against aliens. While this has been in early access since 2019, the latest patch as of recording was on June 9th, 2024, so it is by no means abandoned, although there are complaints that the combat isn't all that engaging, so maybe they will overhaul that later on, but for now, if you just want to make cool mechs, this is the title for you. For all the killing and fighting that mechs are known for, a game that flips that concept on its head is Lightyear Frontier, in which you are now piloting a farming mech instead as you go about building a homestead on a frontier planet and go about uncovering its secrets. You can grow crops, chop trees, and mine for resources, using the power of the mech to more efficiently water the crops, also being able to take care of the alien creatures, using a Slime Rancher-esque vacuum to suck up materials and more, also having co-op support for fun with friends. So for a different kind of farming or mech experience, this is the title to get. One of those games which is just horribly underrated is GALAK-Z, a space combat action roguelite in which you pilot a ship that can also transform into a mech, switching between ranged projectiles with the ship and the more powerful melee sword of the mech. This controls like an arcade shooter, so if you boost and cut engines, the thrust and momentum will still carry you forward, being quite the interesting feeling game, although do note that this is from another era and is on the more difficult end of things. No, this is not Armored Core, but rather Mecha Knight's Nightmare is a mech action shooter from indie developer Damian Kubiak and is definitely worth a play. Set in the year 2049, during the Second Cold War between NATO and the Russia-China alliance, things take a twist for the weird when mutant creatures begin to appear and start attacking all sides, so our hero needs to get in the mech to kill all enemies. Being a 2021 release, this is perhaps Vampire Survivors before Vampire Survivors was cool, not in the sense that it's a roguelite, but rather the swarms of enemies that the game throws at you, where you have a powerful array of weapons to deal with them, perhaps being more Earth Defense Force inspired instead. It is quite the box standard save the world story, but the customization options are pretty insane here as well, since there are over 20 areas to customize, with the best part being that this developer is continuing to work on this game through both free patches and paid DLC, and is impressive coming from a solo developer. Alright, onto something a little bit more traditional in Wolf Stride, a very sleek looking RPG from 2021 that is also under the radar, in which a trio of troublemakers do whatever it takes to enter and win a giant mecha tournament. It has a typical underdog story of your crew lucking their way into a hand-me-down robot and trying to make the best out of it, taking on odd jobs to earn money for repairs and upgrades, while pulling off the unlikeliest of victories in the tournament. The combat is a turn-based JRPG for the most part, combining that with weird minigames and a stylish black and white color palette, which is difficult to pull off. One of the mech indie games that people absolutely love is Brigade Up Armored Edition, an isometric mech action title with a cyberpunk theme, in which you pilot the mech and try to take down the government. It is not all good intentions, however, since you are playing as mercenaries in search of a payday, betraying your own planet so that you can get the payout to get off the planet, setting up interesting incentives, but in terms of core action, it is pretty great. There's also a ton of variety in playable vehicles, extensive campaign missions, and even the ability to build your own levels, and is something special, with there being a sequel in development named Brigade Killers, so check out the first game before that releases. Another anime title of interest is Hardcore Mecha, a game that has quite the amount of variety in gameplay as well, since while for the most part this is a side-scrolling campaign-based action platformer, there are also on-foot, underwater and space shoot-'em-up sections, all with a very impressive art style and awesome mecha designs. There's not too much here in terms of customization options, but there are RPG elements like stat points to allocate, but with over 42 playable mechs in the game, you will be spoiled for choice. There's also additional modes like wave-based survival and even multiplayer PvP, being reminiscent of titles like Super Robot Wars but as an action title.
Welcome to the Warzone, Commander.
One of the most interesting and impressive looking mech games in early access is Mecha Bellum, in which you are customizing your units, placing them in formation and hitting the go button to watch them duke it out with the enemy in auto-battler fashion. As such, it's a little bit similar to simulator titles like Totally Accurate Battle Simulator, but with mechs of course, and is a bit more tactical. Pretty impressive so far in early access with frequent updates as well, and they're up to version 0.8.2, so maybe 1.0 will be in the near future. We don't talk about giant robots without mentioning Planetary Annihilation Titans, one of the OGs in this space, with the developer being crazy enough to release an RTS in 2015, where people have been saying that the genre is dead and have somehow managed to pull it off. There is a lot of history here since the development team has roots going back to Total Annihilation and Supreme Commander, mega-scale RTS titles that were impressive for their time, and that shows in this game, being fine-tuned and updated over the years and is one of the best RTS titles on the market right now. Impressively, its community is still active, although I do expect them to be absolute savages in terms of multiplayer, and another interesting note is that some of the original developers and Kickstarter backers bought the IP rights to this game and have a new title in the works named Industrial Annihilation, which is part RTS, part Factorial, so look out for news with regards to that game as well. I believe that action games inherently have the capacity to reach a wider audience since it's easier to get into, with a game that capitalizes on that fact being the Rift Breaker, a base-building survival action RPG in which you are extracting resources and upgrading your base, but mixes that in with real-time action RPG combat like Diablo that sees you slaughtering hordes of aliens, and man, if that doesn't sound like fun, I don't know what is. Being a fairly modern release, it has a decent visual style as well, and has that compelling gameplay loop of getting more resources to upgrade so that you can get better resources and so on, with powerful weapons and turrets that have you slaughtering aliens by the thousands, which is so satisfying. The success of this has translated to continued support in the form of paid DLC, with 3 released to date so far in Metal Terror, Into the Dark and Heart of the Swamp, which are reasonably priced for the amount of content and as a whole package is one of the best out there. Didn't think I forget, did ya? When it comes to the best mech games, you cannot discuss these without mentioning Into the Breach, a game that gives me Pacific Rim vibes in the best of ways, as you lead a team of 3 robots to stop alien kaiju, having time travelling to explain the roguelite structure. All enemy attacks are telegraphed in this game, so you can pull, push or counter their moves, making you feel so smart when your plan succeeds. But it's also not without its challenges, with the complementary abilities of the mecha of the same squad being interesting, and then you're allowed to mix and match, and is the perfect example of a roguelite tactics title. Watch this video for more tactics games.